If you follow my channel regularly, you know that I normally turn bowls, but I do turn other things. And I have a client that is interested in a wedding band, so that's what I'm turning, and that's what this week's video will focus on. Not only just a ring, but a ring with a guitar string inlaid into it. This client and friend wanted a ring that was very dark in color, so I ended up using walnut, which is a dark wood, especially when finished. So the first thing I got to do is cut off a piece that I'm going to make the ring out of, and you'll notice the orientation here. I wanted it to be end grain running along the length of the ring. That way, when you look at the surface of the ring, you won't see any end grain. So that's why I cut it the way I did. So you'll also notice that I cut it just a bit thicker than what the ring itself is, and then drilled a hole through the center of the piece that is slightly smaller than the inlay channel on the ring. Then I took it over to my lathe and used my carbide tool and started both opening up the opening to match the size of the inlay and also thinning it down so that it would also match the width of the inlay channel. If you look at this picture, you'll notice two things. On the top surface, you'll notice that I took my Forstner bit and just cut a notch into the ring because I need to be able to measure the thickness of the ring that I have. And the way I cut it, if I didn't cut that notch, then I had a rim all the way around the outside, so I couldn't measure the thickness of the ring. The other thing that I did is I used CA glue to stabilize the ring. Walnut is not a very strong wood, and it is going to be very thin in the ring, so I wanted to stabilize it with CA glue just to toughen it up so that it wouldn't chip out in the ring when I was turning it. I realized that I didn't show this part, and for this I apologize. But what I did was I took the ring and made two cuts in the direction of the grain, just small starter cuts, and then I put the ring on the edge of a surface and snapped it in half, and you can see the two halves of the ring here. This is required because I have to fit it in an inlay, and I have a solid ring, so I've got to fit it down into the channel, so I have to have two halves. Even though I carefully measured the opening on these ring, I did have to make some final adjustments with sandpaper just to make it a little bit bigger so that the two halves come together nicely. You can see here I'm still not quite far enough because I have a little bit of a gap, but now once I've sanded a little bit more, that gap is tightened up and can no longer be visible. Once I'm happy with the fit of the wood inside the inlay channel, next I need to glue it in. I have used CA glue before, but I do find the epoxy is a little more forgiving and provides better hold, so that's what I'm doing here. Just mixing up some 5-minute epoxy, putting that in the inlay channel, and then I'll press the wood inside the channel. When doing the glue up, I did use a bit of CA glue, and I did that right where I had my two cut joints. I wanted to glue those together so that they wouldn't chip out when I started to turn them. Both pieces are glued tight into the ring, so they would not have come apart, but I just, again, wanted to prevent those small edges from chipping out. And now you can see the reason that up until this point I've left everything square. It makes it easy for me to clamp the two wooden surfaces together, and you can see or not see that the joint is not visible. Here I've just taken the ring over to my belt sander and knocked the corners off, again just to make it a little bit easier to get started turning the ring itself. And here I am turning the ring just using my carbide tools. One of the advantages of this ring inlay, it is ceramic, and it's a very, very hard surface. I can put my carbide tools right on that surface and it will not scratch it. It's next to impossible to scratch this ceramic surface. So it makes it very easy to get the wood down flush to the channel itself. And in fact, I want to go a little bit below that. I want to actually have a surface of the wood that is just slightly lower than the edge of the ring itself. And I'm talking maybe a thou. And that's just to give me enough so that I can put glue, CA glue, on as a finish and not have it on the ring itself. I don't want the finish to be proud of the ring, but I want to make sure that I've got good coverage on the ring itself. So that's what I'm doing here. I brought it down flush with my carbide tool because I held it on the edges of the ring itself. And then I just used sandpaper to sand down to create that little tiny lip on the edge of the ring itself to make room for the finish. I didn't mention it, but I have a ring mandrel, and that's what's holding this ring in place. And my mandrel is inside of a drill chuck, which has a number 2 Morris taper, which fits inside my lathe. But you'll see that this ring is at the very far end of my ring mandrel. I didn't mention it, but this client has an extremely large finger. I think I could fit the ring over my bicep, and it is pushing my ring mandrel to the very limit. Here I'm just using my calipers to determine where I want the inlay to be. I decided to make it just slightly off center. In hindsight, I may not have done this, I may have centered it, but on this ring it's just slightly off center. The next step in the process, because I'm inlaying the guitar string, I need to cut a groove in the wood itself in order to be able to put the guitar string in place. In fact, I had to remove all the wood. The inlay channel ends up going all the way to the bottom of the ring itself. Here I'm just taking a little bit of sandpaper and I'm just widening the width of the channel out a little bit, just again to make it so that the guitar string will fit nicely. One thing I ended up doing later on, which I don't show, is that I have another tool, a very thin carbide parting tool that I was able to use, which is about the same thickness as a guitar string, so I didn't have to do as much sanding. Here you'll notice that I'm no longer using my ring mandrel. I don't want to get a lot of glue on that. It just makes it harder to clean up. So here I just have a wooden dowel that I've tapered and I put some tuck tape over top of it. Surprisingly, the CA glue doesn't stick very well to the tuck tape. Now I'm just starting to put a little bit of glue in that channel that I've cut to receive the ring. Apologize for my fat head being in the camera. But I put just a little bit of glue down in it and then start laying the guitar string down into that channel. You'll notice here that the guitar string wants to spring up. I did try and bend it a little bit first to try and get it to lay in there, but it still is a bit springy. I also use accelerator, so I just do a little bit at a time, put a little bit of glue in, use a little bit of accelerator, and then work to the next section. One thing you do have to be careful of is that you don't get hardened glue ahead of where you're going to put the guitar string in, which would end up creating a hump underneath the guitar string. Here you'll see that I'm using a metal scraper to hold everything down in place, because if you do get any glue on the outside and you push it with your fingers, your skin will stick to that area and it leaves an unsightly mark in the finish. So I use the metal putty scraper here just to press everything into place. So here's the finished product. I think it turned out very well. So it's a walnut ring inlaid with a guitar string, finished with CA glue, and that finish will last forever. The owner will never have to do anything with it whatsoever. That's the most durable finish that you can put on anything that you handle on a regular basis.